be fun tonight. Luke chapter 22, verse 35. Then Jesus asked them, "When I sent you without purse, bag, or sandals, did you lack anything?" "Nothing," they answered. In Jesus, there's nothing we lack. In Jesus, there is nothing we lack. So I'll try and, I'm glad that we're here tonight. This will be different because it's small, but it'll be good. And so you guys, this has nothing to do with the sermon. This is bonus material. But, a pet peeve of mine is when you show up or you're seeing someone do a speech, like they won a Grammy or an Oscar or something. And they get up there and they're doing all their thank yous and they say, anything's possible. If you just work real hard, your dreams can come true too. I remember Kevin Garnett in 2008. He's with the Boston Celtics. They win an NBA championship. A reporter comes up to him and asks him how he feels. And he says, anything is possible. And then he raises his arms and shouts, anything is possible! And I thought, man, I wish it were true, Kevin Garnett. But man, I had a dream when I was in elementary school to play in the NBA. And two things stopped me from doing that. One is my height, and two is my level of coordination, which made playing in the NBA an impossibility for me. So most of the time, when it comes to pursuing our dreams, it feels a little more like this. Show that slide, Jonathan. This is a little bit more of what it feels like for me, is really like you feel kind of duped by that. But tonight, I have good news that some dreams do come true. I have two dreams that have come true recently. The first is, for the first time in my life, I have a Choco Tan. Now, I have been dreaming of the day I would, one, own a pair of Chacos, and then two, wear them enough to have a Choco Tan. And I got them last August, so I didn't have quite enough of the season down. But right now, I'm sporting the beginnings of a Choco Tan, which means that some dreams do come true. And the second dream, go ahead and show the slide, Jonathan, is that I got to have lunch with NT Wright on April 26th at 1 p.m. for 30 minutes. Just me and NT Wright. It's a long story. I can tell you about it later. But, with our Jacobs Well community, you guys have heard me quote this guy enough that I felt like you could share in my joy. We didn't talk about anything theological for 30 minutes. We just sat and talked about life and enjoyed each other's company, and I was honored that he took me up on the invitation to do lunch, and it was a good time. And so some dreams do come true. Back to today, though. Today's Mother's Day. And so as I was telling our crowd this morning, it's an exciting and joyful day for most people. And so if you haven't yet, I did this afternoon, call your moms. For a lot of moms, this is exciting. For a lot of us, this is an exciting day. And so if it's an exciting day for you, I hope that you have got to enjoy it, or you get to enjoy the rest of it, or you get to call your moms. But I also want to acknowledge this morning and this evening that there are people who this day brings some pain and grief. Sometimes it's because of the loss of a mom. Sometimes it's a mother or a woman who's desired to have children, and just that has not become a reality. And so if this day is at all painful for you, or maybe one day will be painful, I just want you guys to know that we're with you in that. And it's okay to have grief. And so if this is a joyful day, I pray that it is celebrated. But if it's a sad day, that's okay too. That's okay too. And so I have 3 Sundays left with our community, and I started thinking, should I give 3 final words to Jacob's Well? And that became really daunting almost crippling when I started thinking about, well, what do my last words need to be? And so I thought, you know what? I'm not going to do that. Why don't we just open the Bible, and why don't I just preach from the Bible, and we learn from the scriptures that God has spoken through and will continue to speak through. And so that's what we're going to do tonight. So open your Bibles, if you would, to Luke chapter 22. It's right after the book of Mark, right before the book of John. We're going to spend a significant amount of time in this story. I'm going to chime in every once in a while with some thoughts. But we're going to start in Luke, big number 22, and we're going to go little number 7. And I'm going to read that here. And so Luke 22, verse 7. Then came the day of unleavened bread on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. And Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, "Go and make preparations for us to eat the Passover." Where do you want us to prepare for it?" they asked. "As you enter the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him to the house that he enters, and say to the owner of the house, 'The teacher asks, where is the guest room, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' And he'll show you a large room upstairs, all furnished. Make preparations there." And so they left, and they found things just as Jesus had told them. So they prepared the Passover. And when the hour came, Jesus and his apostles reclined at the table. Now, there's a lot of this story that I'm not going to have time to dig into. And so one of those things tonight is I'm not going to be able to spend time talking about the significance of this being a Passover meal. But we've spent time talking about that in the past, and I'm sure Bob and others will spend time talking about that in the future. So that's not where we're going to spend our time, even though that is incredibly significant to the story. But we are going to talk about how this story, this happens around the table. Everything we're about to read happens around a table filled with food. And so this is tactile. Like, this is something, Jesus, the disciples don't know it yet, but Jesus is about to be crucified the next day. And then a few days later, he's going to be resurrected. And so anytime death happens, the things leading up to death seem to get amplified. And so here, they're sitting around a table, and they're taking bread, and they're drinking wine, and I can only imagine what it might have been like a week later to take bread and eat it. And the memories that would flood your mind about this night we're about to read. I can only imagine what it would have been like to take wine and to drink it. And again, the memories that would flood your mind thinking about this night. So this happens around a table, which is really, really incredible, everything that we're going to talk about tonight. So this past weekend, I had a chance to take Robin down to Shenandoah, Iowa, which is my hometown. And Shenandoah, Iowa has a population of 5,000 people. And she kept looking at me and saying, "I can't believe you came from this town." And like that's not a knock on the town, it's just she sees me as a city boy, but those aren't my roots. And so we had a chance to go to Shenandoah, Iowa. And one thing I need to do in Shenandoah is I always got to stop at a place called J Drug. And it's a pharmacy that's been around for a very long time, but they have an old-fashioned soda fountain. And when I get to J Drug, I always order an extra vanilla Coke. Because they don't make it like this anywhere else in the world. I've got an extra vanilla Coke at Sonic. It's good, but it always disappoints. Because I'm like, but it's not J Drug. And so I went and I got my extra vanilla Coke on Friday afternoon, and I took a sip of that, and it was like an onslaught of memories. Like memories flooded about my childhood and about biking to J Drug with Danny McCall and sitting at the bar stools and drinking our 25-cent extra vanilla Cokes, our 50 cents if we splurged and got a large extra vanilla Cokes at the bar, and thinking about my hometown and thinking about all of these things, about a simpler way of life, simple living. All of these things just come as I have a taste. It's a taste of a vanilla Coke. And I think that's sort of what we're dealing with here in this story, is I think that there can be things that have a power to them or an ability to function like a time machine and take us back to a moment or a time. And so this meal is happening at a table with bread and wine that when these disciples are going to eat this in the future, it's going to be like that vanilla Coke. It's going to take them back to a time. On Thursday morning, before we left for Iowa, don't judge me, but if you do, I'm gone in 3 weeks, so it doesn't matter. But Mina really likes digging in our DVD drawer, and she likes the Charlie Brown DVDs and pointing at Charlie Brown and Snoopy. And so I put in Charlie Brown Christmas on Thursday morning. I put it on. And she's getting a kick out of it because all of a sudden the characters are coming to life on the screen, and she's loving it. But I'm listening to Christmas music. And at first I'm kind of annoyed with it because it is May, and you guys know my philosophy. By October, it's okay. But it's a little early, but then I start to really listen to it. And again, I'm flooded with memories of Oklahoma Christmases with my grandparents. I think one reason I love Christmas music so much is not because it's actually that good, but because it reminds me of some of the happiest moments of my life. And so you guys have something like that? I mean, like a special dish that your mom made growing up, and it just takes you back when you have that thing, or there's a taste that if you taste that thing, it's like a time machine, or there's a smell, or a sound, or you guys have something that kind of works like that in your life, and it just takes you there, like my vanilla Coke. Well, I think that's what's going on here around a shared meal. Everything in this story that we're about to read happens around a taste. There's a taste. And so I want to keep going. We're going to pick up the story in verse 15. And Jesus said to them, I've eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I tell you, I will not eat it again until it finds its fulfillment in the kingdom of God. And after taking the cup, he gave thanks and said, take this and divide it among you. For I tell you, I will not drink again from the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes. And he took bread, and he gave thanks, and he broke it. And he gave it to them, saying, this is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And in the same way, after the supper, he took the cup, saying, this cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you. Imagine what it would have been like a week later for the disciples. After the crucifixion of Jesus, after seeing the death of their would-be Messiah, and then after seeing him raised from the dead, imagine what it would have been like to then take a piece of bread and eat it. And to take a cup of wine and drink it. And all of a sudden you're remembering, this is my body. This is the cup of the new covenant. Like these things just right there. Right there. It's like hitting the replay button at the taste of bread and the taste of wine. And I imagine this part of the evening would have been a happy memory. Right? Like that time when they're gathered around the table and at this point in the story, things are pretty peaceable. And you're gathered around the table with your closest friends who are like family, men who are like brothers. Like that taste, bringing those sensations back to you. Well, let's keep reading. But the hand of him who is going to betray me is with mine on the table. And the Son of Man will go as it has been decreed, but woe to the man who betrays him. And they began to question among themselves which of them it might be who would do this. So that same taste a week later that would recall to memory this brotherhood and this sweet fellowship in this sweet time, that same taste, the taste of the bread and the taste of the wine would also recall to memory that friend who was like a brother who betrayed you, who betrayed Jesus. There would be pain as you remember that. This is both filled with happy, sort of nostalgic sounds too. I think it's bigger than nostalgic going on, but happy, nostalgic memories going on, but also pain. Painful reminder that, oh yeah, he did that. He betrayed us. Let's keep going. So a dispute also arose among them as to which of them was considered the greatest. Again, keep in mind, they don't know Jesus is going to die the next day. So they don't know what's about to happen. And death seems to amplify all the things where like, I wish it would have said that, or I wish it would have done that. This is going to turn into an embarrassing memory. Because the night before Jesus' death, they're arguing about who is the greatest. And Jesus said to them, the kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who exercise authority over them call themselves benefactors. But you are not to be like that. Instead, the greatest among you should be like the youngest, and the one who rules like the one who serves. For who is greater than the one who is at the for who is greater, the one who is at the table or the one who serves? Is it not the one who is at the table? But I am among you as one who serves. You are those who have stood by me in my trials, and I confer on you a kingdom just as my Father conferred on me, so that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom and sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Again, there's some stuff in this story that we don't have time to get to tonight. But what I want you to notice here is that when you eat of this a week later, when you eat a bread and you drink a wine, even a few days later, this is going to call to mind a really embarrassing episode where you were part of a group of people arguing about who's the best. And lest we think we're above this here, we might not always vocalize it, but a lot of times in our own minds, we have something like this going on too. A game of comparison and feeling better about ourselves because we're not like them or those people. But here, these guys are vocalizing it. Before the night before Jesus' death, and at the taste of that bread and the taste of that wine, I imagine this is not a fun memory to bring to mind. Verse 31. Jesus says, Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift you all as wheat, but I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. But Simon Peter replied, Lord, I'm ready to go with you to prison and to death. But Jesus answered, I tell you, Peter, before the rooster crows today, you will deny 3 times that you know me. Here, imagine what it would have been like for Peter a week later, when he's eating some bread and drinking some wine, and his mind goes to that moment where he was sure of himself, where he was sure that he would not deny Jesus. This is a massive failure for him. This is a moment he did not expect. This is a moment of massive failure. And sometimes I think there are certain tastes and smells and sights and sounds that bring to our mind our own massive failures, where we can't believe we did that. We can't believe we hurt the people we hurt. We can't believe we were just flippant or just made those decisions. We can't believe that. Sometimes there's taste and sounds and smells and sights that bring those to mind. And I want to just ask us a few questions for our hearts while we think about that. Did Jesus refuse to serve Peter just because he knew Peter was going to betray him that night? Deny him? No. Did Jesus refuse to serve Judas even though he knew Judas was going to betray him that night? No. In fact, in John's gospel, we have the story of Jesus as they're at this supper. We have the story of Jesus washing the feet of his disciples. And Jesus washing the feet of Judas, which was an act of incredible service and love. Washing even though he knew Judas was going to betray him. And so I think one thing we need to remember about the communion table, about the Eucharist, is that it's not for the already put together, but it's actually for us to recall the love of Jesus towards us, even when we're already broken. It's for us to recall the love of Jesus towards us, even in our brokenness, just as Jesus offered and served Peter, just as Jesus offered and served Judas. Verse 35. Then Jesus asked them, "When I sent you without purse, bag, or sandals, did you lack anything?" "Nothing," they said. Now, we're going to come back to this verse. And this is where we're going to land the plane here in a little bit. But I'm going to save some of my thoughts on this verse for when we return at the end. And so then verse 36 through 38 gets really confusing. And so verse 36, Jesus says, yeah, I told you to go without a bag and a purse and sandals. He says, but now if you have a purse, take it, and also a bag. And if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. It is written, and he was numbered with the transgressors. And I tell you that this must be fulfilled. Yes, what is written about me is reaching the fulfillment. And the disciples say, see, Lord, here are 2 swords. And Jesus says, that's enough. What is going on here? This seems a little odd. So first, again, a reminder, all of this, everything that we just read, happens around a meal. It happens around a table. People are sharing food. They're breaking bread. They're sharing wine. Think of like a Thanksgiving meal. That's what's going on here. This is an intimate, close, meaningful meal where the sights and the sounds and the smells are going to have the power to recall these things to memory. And when they drink wine and when they'd eat bread in the future, it'd be like hitting replay mode. And the things that would replay would be both incredible and also deeply painful episodes and moments about this night. And I think it's a wonder that the earliest Christians decide to take this and celebrate it weekly. And I think they decide to take this and they celebrate it weekly because perhaps the bread and the wine was meant to recall all of these memories. To recall these things over and over. So, but for the rest of our time tonight, we're going to do 2 things. One, we're going to take a rabbit trail. The rabbit trail is a rabbit trail from my main point, but it's a necessary rabbit trail for this text, specifically verses 36 through 38. And so we're going to talk about that for a little bit, and then we're going to land the plane at verse 35. So that's the rest of our evening. So if you're like, where's he going with this? And well, we're rabbit trailing, and then we're coming back. And so our rabbit trail, verse 36 through 38. What is happening? Go sell your cloak and buy a sword, right? We have 2, and then they say, we have 2 swords. And Jesus says, that's enough. What is happening here? Now, there are some Christians who look at this passage as a justification for self-defense. When Jesus says, sell your cloak and buy swords. I'm not going to get into whether self-defense is biblically justifiable in other places. That's for you to decide and us to talk about at a different time. But I am here to say that if to use this specific text as justification for self-defense is to grossly misunderstand what is going on here. Is to grossly misunderstand what's going on here. And so I consulted Preston Sprinkle on this passage, and he asked, as you're looking at these verses, like, is Jesus adding footnotes to the Sermon on the Mount? You know, like, turn the other cheek, pray for your, pray for those who persecute you, love your enemies, and sell your cloak and buy a sword, right? Like, what is going on? What is the deal here? And to state the obvious right away, 2 swords for 11 disciples is not enough for self-defense. 11 disciples need more than 2 swords. So something else is happening in this story. What is it? Well, Preston Sprinkle sees 2 possible scenarios. The first, he says, is he thinks some scholars tend to see Jesus speaking allegorically here. And so I'll read this quote from him. He says, New Testament scholar I. Howard Marshall says that the command to buy a sword is a call to be ready for hardship and self-sacrifice. Darrell Bach says that the command to buy a sword symbolically points to readiness and self-sufficiency, not revenge. Catholic scholar Joseph Fitzmyer writes, the introduction of the sword signals that the period of the church will be marked with persecution, which of course we see throughout the book of Acts. So there's a line of thought that thinks Jesus is speaking allegorically here, and that's people write about that. But Preston Sprinkle actually prefers another interpretation that he believes does slightly more justice to this story. And so just throw up that next slide here, Jonathan. He says, notice that right after Jesus says, buy a sword, he quotes Isaiah 53:12, which predicts that Jesus would be numbered with the transgressors. He says, then the disciples reveal they already have 2 swords, to which Jesus says, it is enough. Now, Rome only crucified those who were a potential threat to the empire. For Jesus to be crucified, Rome would have to convict him as a potential revolutionary. And this is the point of the swords. With swords in their possession, Jesus and his disciples would be viewed as potential revolutionaries, and Jesus would therefore fulfill Isaiah 53 to be numbered with other revolutionary transgressors. If Rome didn't have any legal grounds to incriminate Jesus, there would have been no crucifixion. So what's the deal with sell your cloak, buy a sword, but then they say we have 2 swords, and Jesus says that's enough. 2 swords was enough to put Jesus on the cross. 2 swords was enough to put Jesus on the cross. But continuing on a rabbit trail, because I believe that this perspective actually makes the most sense of the whole of Luke 22. Because if we skip down to a few verses and skip down to verse 47, so now they're away from the meal. They're in the Garden of Gethsemane, and Jesus is about to be arrested. Okay, and look what happens. Verse 47. While Jesus was still speaking, a crowd came up, and the man who was called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. And he approached Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus asked him, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? And when Jesus' followers saw what was going to happen, they said, Lord, should we strike with our swords? Our 2 swords, should we do it? And then one of them, he doesn't even wait for Jesus to answer, right? And he struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his right ear. Now, I don't think that he was intending to cut off a guy's right ear. Like, I don't think most people with their swords go, you know, like that's not how you use swords. Here's what happens. You swipe for the head, man, and you duck, and you get your ear sliced off. That's what's going on here. But look at what Jesus says. He says, no more of this. No more. This is not how we're doing this thing anymore. No more of this. And he touched the man's ear and he healed him. The man who's arresting him, right? And then Jesus said to the chief priests and the officers of the temple guard and the elders who had come for him, am I leading a rebellion? Right? Remember rebellion, numbered among the transgressors, all that stuff, that you have come with swords and clubs? Every day I was with you in the temple courts, and you did not lay a hand on me. But this is your hour when darkness reigns. Jesus says, no more of this. Go to the next slide. In Matthew's gospel, the gospel of Matthew, Matthew puts the words on the lips of Jesus. I don't know how that slide got in this show. It was there this morning too. I forgot to take it out. Go to the next slide. I was like, building. And then it's like, what? I didn't do it, I swear. I have no idea how it got there. And I don't know why I didn't take it out. Anyway, throwback. Look at what Matthew says. These words he puts on Jesus' lips. Put your sword back in its place, Jesus said. For all who draw the sword will die by the sword. So thinking, when Jesus says, go sell your cloak, buy a sword, to think of that as a biblical justification for self-defense is a gross misapplication of this specific text. Again, we're not talking about other texts, which we can talk about some other time. But this specific text is not about self-defense. This specific text is about how two swords were needed to be numbered among the transgressors so that Rome would put him on a cross. That's what's happening here. And that's important for us in this story. And that makes the most cohesive sense of the whole of Luke 22. And when Jesus says, no more, right? This makes the sense it does. And so now we're coming back from the rabbit trail. But I want to say another thing. This memory of the disciples saying, should we use our swords? And then one of the disciples trying to kill a guy, this would also come back, I think, when you take bread and you eat it, and you take wine and you drink it. This embarrassing misunderstanding of the purposes of Jesus would come back in that taste. It would come back. And so Minneapolis is my home. It has become Robin and I's home. It's where we've learned to be a married couple. Jacob's Well, you are a family. We have shared so much life together, and moving is so scary. The fear of the unknown is so scary for me, knowing that I don't actually know what's going to happen beyond 2 years. In fact, I don't know. I hope that this is a great, worthwhile 2 years for us, but I can't even know that. And the fear of the unknown is so frightening. But I read this verse a few weeks ago, and it thumped me in the chest. It is exactly what I needed. And I think a lot of you guys, maybe it's the fear of the unknown. Maybe it's just something else that's got your anxiety going. Something else has got you worked up. And you will need to hear this. And if you don't need to hear it tonight, you'll need to hear this in the future, so you might as well listen tonight. You'll need this word as I needed it and do need it. Verse 35. Then Jesus asked them, when I sent you without purse, bag, or sandals, did you lack anything? Nothing, they answered. When I read that at first, I thought, you dummies, you lacked a purse, money bag, and sandals. Like, what do you mean you lack nothing? What is going on here? In Jesus, there is nothing we lack. In Jesus, there is nothing we lack. Probably one of the most misquoted people besides Jesus by preachers is a lady named Corrie ten Boom. And you can throw up that next slide, Jonathan. Corrie ten Boom was a Holocaust survivor. She wrote a book called The Hiding Place. And, wow, my antenna fell off. Who knew? Corrie ten Boom was a Holocaust survivor. She had seen hell on earth. She had seen those nearest and dearest to her die. She has so many incredible stories that I would just advise you, if you haven't read this book and you want to be moved by the power of God and moved by the forgiveness that he can enable his people to come to and embrace, you should read this book. It's really great. But one of the most misquoted things Corrie ten Boom ever says is that people misquote, it's a misquote, and they put on the lips of Corrie ten Boom, she said that the safest place is the center of God's will. The safest place to be. And what ends up happening is people like me in our church setting, people in suburban mega church settings, people in little rural church settings, people quote this verse, quote this phrase by Corrie ten Boom. The safest place is the center of God's will. And it makes us feel kind of good about ourselves and where we're at. And it also makes us think there's some sort of safety that's actually not promised to us ever. And that's not actually what Corrie ten Boom said. But if they would even remember, she survived a concentration camp. She could not have possibly meant what our minds kind of default to when we hear the safest place is the center of God's will. She must have meant something else because of the hell she saw, what she went through. What does she mean? Her actual quote is that there are no places that are safer than other places. The center of God's will is our only safety. There are no places that are safer than other places. The center of his will is our only safety. What could she have possibly meant by that as a concentration camp survivor? As someone who's seen dear loved ones die? As someone who's seen the worst sort of atrocities that could be committed to other human beings, by human beings done? What could she have possibly meant by the fact that she says the center of God's will is our only safety? What she meant is that in Jesus, there is nothing we lack. Everything else can be taken. Everything else can be stripped away. But in Jesus, there is nothing, there is not a thing we lack. And this truth thumped me in the chest a few weeks ago as I'm thinking about the unknown. There is nothing we lack. I dibs the communion reflection tonight because I get to do that sometimes. And so I'm going to lead us towards a time of communion based on what we have just read. And Sarah, you and Anthony can come on up and help us as I just want to talk about a few things. But while they're coming up, a few instructions for our Jacobswell community. One is that we have a communion station in the back. We have the bread and the cup. And our practice at Jacobswell is we have a few songs here at the end. And anytime during these songs, as you feel led, you can get up if you are a follower of Jesus, and you can take the bread, which reminds us of Jesus' body broken for us, and you can dip it in the cup, which reminds us of Jesus' blood shed for us. Anytime during those songs, if you're a follower of Jesus, you can partake. And so those instructions aside, the Eucharist, this is a tactile reminder for us. Just as those followers of Jesus would have come to the table and they would have tasted And that taste would have been an onslaught of memories that flooded their minds about that night. We too get to come and taste. In the Eucharist, we get to taste the reality that in Jesus there is nothing we lack. In the Eucharist, we get to come, and it is an invitation to come to the table and to taste and to recall to mind when things have been wonderful with Jesus and his people. I imagine that when those first followers of Jesus, when they tasted the bread and when they drank of the wine, they would have called to memory that sweet time of fellowship and brotherhood and camaraderie around the table that night. And that would have been good. The Eucharist is an invitation for us as we take the bread and we dip it in the cup to allow those good memories to flood our mind and to taste the reality that in Jesus there is nothing we lack. But the Eucharist is also an invitation to taste and remember times of deep sadness. To taste and recall to mind times of embarrassing failures. And it's a time to remember, as we call those to mind, that in Jesus there is nothing we lack. The Eucharist is a time to taste and remember that in difficult times, when we are struggling, when we are failing, when we are falling flat on our face, Jesus isn't holding out on us. But just as Jesus served Peter when he knew Peter was going to betray him, just as Jesus served and washed the feet of Judas when he knew that, I keep saying Peter was going to betray him, but just when he served Peter when he knew Peter was going to deny him, and just as he served and washed the feet of Judas when he knew Judas was going to betray him, Jesus is not holding out on us. So as we struggle, as we fall, as we fail, the Eucharist is a reminder that Jesus isn't holding out on us. I have a few things I want us to call to memory tonight as we partake. When we fail, when we have failed, come to the table. Taste. Recall to mind your failures. And then taste the reality. In Jesus, there is nothing we lack. When we struggle, come to the table. Taste. Recall to mind your struggle. And then taste the reality that in Jesus there is nothing we lack. When we compare ourselves to others and forget that greatness doesn't come in vying for position, but greatness comes instead when we seek to serve one another and be a servant to each other. When we forget that, when we're caught in the comparison game, come to the table. Taste. Recall to mind that game we get so caught up in, that comparison game. And then remember Jesus, the servant. And taste the reality in Jesus. There is nothing we lack. When we draw our swords to put up a fight, instead of laying them down, when we're angry and mad and frustrated, we can come to the table. You can recall to mind your anger and your frustration in times when you have not laid down your sword, but picked up your sword to fight. Recall it to mind. Taste. And then remember the reality. In Jesus, there is nothing we lack. When we are tempted to chase all the things we don't have, when we are tempted to think that life is in the abundance of our possessions, in our bags and purses and sandals, like the disciples, when we get caught up in trying to have all the things, come to the table. Taste. Recall to mind the things you are pursuing to fill a void in your life. And then taste the reality that in Jesus, there is nothing we lack. And when we, I'm talking you and me, us, look out towards an unknown future, a scary, unknown future, and have no idea what may lie ahead for us, no idea what the future might hold for us, come to the table, taste, recall to mind when the disciples saw their Messiah crucified and thought, we have no idea what's next. And recall to mind their surprise when they encountered their resurrected Jesus. Come to the table. Taste the reality that in Jesus there's nothing we lack. Sarah Groves wrote a song that as I was preparing this sermon and as I was turning over this passage, it kept coming to my mind. And I don't remember the name of the song, but there's a line repeated in the chorus over and over and over again. To God, saying, you withhold no good thing from us. You withhold no good thing from us, God. And then she says in one part of the song, pain is no measure of your faithfulness. You withhold no good thing from us. What's she saying there? She's saying one of the truest statements in all the world, because Jesus has given himself for us. And that is that in Jesus, no matter what life throws at us, in Jesus, there's nothing we lack. And God withholds no good thing from us because God has given us the good thing in Jesus. Jesus is the good thing that is for all who embrace him. Let's pray. Let's come to the table. Let's recall to mind. And let's taste the reality. In Jesus, there's nothing we lack. Jesus, help us. We come all sorts of different places in life, all sorts of memories. Some of us in a good and exciting spot, some of us in a scary spot, some of us in spots of pain. God, I pray that as we approach your table tonight, we would recall pain. We would recall failure. We would recall good times. We would recall scary, unknown times. We would recall times when we picked up the sword instead of laid it down. We would recall all these times, just as the disciples would have had these rush into their minds as they tasted the bread and drank of the cup. God, recall these things to our memory as we approach the table tonight. And then may we taste the reality that in you, Jesus, there is nothing